take a deep breath, meaning it's going to be okay. I know it's an anxious feeling when your pastor, your beloved pastor that's been here a long time, is leaving you, and you're wondering what's going to happen next. But I'm here to say, we will be walking with you. You don't have to figure it out yourself. And it is a process, so there's no test at the end of this tonight. You don't have to remember everything I say. We'll deal with things a step at a time as we get there. The first thing I want to do is just to talk about, there's kind of three major pieces as you're walking through a call process. You're in this early stage right now of transition. I don't know, when exactly is Pastor Paul leaving? What's his last Sunday? Yeah, right. Will he be here until then, or is
28th he'll be.
Okay. So you're kind of dealing with the goodbyes, with the last, all the things that there's a last time, all of those kinds of things. And you're wondering what's going to happen next. The early stages of your transition will be figuring out if there are going to be Sundays when you're going to need a supply pastor, and that's your responsibility as a congregation, whoever is going to do that, set that. We will make sure that your dean, Pastor Jim O'Hanlon, comes and meets with you with the council to do an exit interview. He'll be doing an exit interview with Pastor Paul. Just all of these things that signal that things are going to be different. We move from that into the intentional interim phase. And that's not just called that because you're going to have an intentional interim pastor, but because it's an interim time for you all as well. That intentional interim pastor will be here to be your pastor. He will be here on, Sundays. He will be out in the hospitals visiting, all of those kinds of things. But in addition, he will be working with you specifically on getting ready to call your next pastor. Even in a really healthy congregation, where you've had a good and happy relationship as you've had, there's work to be done. You all need to figure out who you are as a congregation without your pastor. Because when a pastor's been around for a while, they really kind of have a tendency to maybe rub off on the congregation to help shape some of that. You all need to figure out who you are, and the most important question is, what's God calling you to do? What's God calling Emanuel to do at this time, in this place? What's that mission? Because that's really the key piece about being a congregation, is that you are being called here, you're called to be in this place to serve God's people, certainly within your community inside, but also outside. So the intentional interim pastor, in addition to just doing all of those pastoral things, will be working with you to ask those kinds of questions. What's our mission? Where do we want to go? Where do we feel God's calling us? What kind of a leader do we need to help that we think God's calling us? What are the gifts and skills and callings that we think are important for our next pastor to have to lead us to where we have discerned God's calling us to be? So that's that intentional interim part. And then we move into the active call process. That's when a call committee will be formed. It'll be a while before there is a call committee. You're likely to have what we call a transition committee, which are some folks that work specifically with the interim pastor to do some of that work I mentioned. and one of the tasks that will happen leading into the call process is that you will write what's called a ministry site profile. And that's where you will convey all of that stuff I was just talking about. That's where you're going to talk about what are the gifts of this congregation? What are your ministry goals? What's your sense of mission? What are the gifts that you think you need in a new pastor? And that guides then as we move into the call process. When we get to that point, when you've completed your profile and you're ready to go, I will meet with the council and the call committee to go over that profile. Not to make corrections, not to make judgments, but just to make sure that I understand what you're saying. Because this really guides who might be presented to you. So, you know, all of us have this thing. I can write something and know exactly what I meant. Somebody else might read it and think it means something else. So that part of the process is simply so that I sit down and make sure that I know what it is that your congregation is discerning as far as your mission and the kind of leader you need. Based on that profile, you will get a slate of names at a time, and we'll talk as we get close to that with the council and the call committee. We'll talk more specifically about that. But you'll have the call committee will get a slate of names. They'll work through that slate before they get other names. It's about mutual discernment. It's not a job interview. It's not trying to make sure that is this the best person. It's about discerning together with these pastoral candidates, does this seem to be what God's calling us to together? You know, there are a lot of wonderful congregations out there, and there are a lot of wonderful pastors out there. That's not really the question. The question is, where does it feel like God's leading us? So as we work with the call committee, that's the emphasis that we'll put on that. During that time, you can be really supportive of the call committee certainly by praying for them, but also by respecting the work that they need to be about. That work is confidential, so don't try to worm it out of them. In terms of names, you know, they will keep you updated in terms of we've received a slate of candidates, we're in the process of interviewing, but they cannot tell, they won't even be telling this to the council. They cannot say names, they can't even talk about kind of identifying things. Why is that? Well, there's really two reasons. One is, in order to really let this discernment happen, it needs to happen without people kind of saying, oh, I went and looked this person up on Google, and I don't know if that's a good man. They just need to be able to listen and discern where they feel the Spirit's working. The other thing is out of respect for those pastoral candidates. Oftentimes, when pastors are in a process like this, they're always discerning, but they may be discerning, is it time for them to go? But at that point, they're not saying anything to their congregation. And what happens if word gets back to that congregation that their pastor is actively involved in a process, and if it turns out that this is not the right match, in many ways that ministry is done because the congregation feels like you're on your way out. And you might say, but how would we know that? Well, you would be amazed at stories of, you know, you all are here in New York, there's a pastor out in California, and why should we have to worry about this? Well, somebody's brother's cousin's best friend's next door neighbor happens to go to the church where that pastor is. So please, as the call committee is working, be encouraging, be prayerful, but respect the fact that they can't tell you any details during that time. When they have made a decision, when they have discerned that candidate Smith is really who they think is being called here to Emanuel, they will make that recommendation to the council. The council then is responsible for calling you all together. You'll get a chance to meet and greet. There's usually an opportunity to listen to the pastor preach, but it is your vote as a congregation then that is, we call this pastor to come and be among us. Everybody's a part of this. You'll be a part of it as you work together on the ministry site profile. That's not something that's kind of done by three people sitting in a cigar-filled room. There will be opportunities for you in surveys, small groups, however that works out here. So you'll be involved in that. You will also be the ones who actually vote on calling that pastor to be among you. So, as we get to each of those phases, I'll be working with council and then call committee about the details, the nitty-gritty stuff. But basically, that's how the process works. It will not happen like that because there's work to be done. You all need to grieve a bit. Your pastor is leaving. You need to think and work on who you are without that pastor. You need to explore together what God's calling you to do. That takes a little bit of time. So don't rush. You don't have to drag along, but let the Spirit work. Give room for the Spirit to work. I'll tell you, I just see it over and over and over again, where God is at work in this process. And I believe if you're open to that, and if you're willing to think about this as mutual discernment, that your pastor is out there, and God's going to be working to bring you together. Any kinds of questions about any of this? Yeah.
So you mentioned that there could be candidates from around as far as California. How do we, as a local community, get to know that person when they're across the country?
Generally, what happens is the call committee, when they get that slate of names, and it's usually 3 people, I don't know, Kathleen, if this was your rule or not.
Whatever your rule
But
is.
my rule is the call committee must interview every name they get. Why? Because paperwork is only paperwork. I wouldn't want to be dismissed simply because of my paperwork. I wouldn't want you all as a congregation to be dismissed simply because of your paperwork. Good. So everyone has to be interviewed, and everybody has to be interviewed the same way in that first round. So say you have 2 people within an hour or 2 drive, but you have one person that's somewhere else. And remember, this could be any ELCA pastor. So who knows where they might come from. You can't say, well, we're going to schedule, sit down face-to-face with the 2 people who are close, and then we'll do a Skype with the person who's far away, because that's just like, it's just 2 completely different experiences. So in that case, you'd probably do all Skype for your first round. You then decide if you want to move on with 1, 2, or 3 of them. So the call committee could say, boy, we really like all of these, and we could see potential here. We could see all of these as our pastors. So we want to move forward to the next round. They could say, well, we really like Pastor We're really discerning that that's the way we want to go. We're going to release Pastor B and C, or we're going to keep Pastor A and B and release C. Or they could call me up and say, Margy, these are all wonderful pastors, but we're just not feeling like any of them are the pastor for us. And then we start over. But if they want to move on, whoever they want to move on to, most often that second interview then is a face-to-face. So you need to plan and have a little money in the budget to bring someone in. That visit usually includes kind of a more in-depth interview, face-to-face, following up on some of the things you talked about in the first round. It will include some less structured time with the call committee, just kind of getting to know each other, maybe dinner at somebody's house or whatever that might be. It will involve tour of the church, of the parsonage, when nobody's around, which is a little tricky sometimes. Getting to know the community, if somebody isn't aware of that. So it will be those pieces. And at some point, either at that point or maybe the next step down the road, we do what we call preaching at a neutral site. Not here yet, but when the call committee, we work with, and oftentimes we ask the dean to help arrange this, so that the candidate will preach at a church that isn't too terribly far away, so that the call committee can get there, but probably isn't the next church down the road. So that they can get a sense for that. Now my caveat always is, that's not going to be the same as hearing somebody week after week in their own congregation, but it does give the call committee a sense of who that person is as preacher and call leader. So it's a long answer to your question, but we try to do it in a way that really allows the committee to discern. Sometimes that happens right away. I mean, this was unbelievable to me. About the beginning of May, I gave a name to a congregation who had already been through a bunch of names, and I was just like, I don't think they're ever going to agree. I gave them the name. A week later, they called me up, and the call chair said, oh, we really, and so I was just down to one name with them. I mean, it was like I'd already given them a bunch that they had released. Oh, we just love her. We're flying her in tomorrow to meet with the council. That's how fast it went, and she was just called Sunday. So, again, I think these are Holy Spirit things. There's not a set timetable to any of that, but it really is a sense of, does this feel like who God's calling to be here? Yeah.
I almost feel guilty to pull a pastor out of the congregation, and then they're going through the same thing that we are going through.
Big party,
I understand that, but there's a couple of things here. One is pastors, I think, good pastors pay attention to what God's doing. And even if you love your congregation, if you feel, oh, these people are so important to me, you may have, as a pastor, that nagging feeling that God is calling you to do something else somewhere else. Sometimes it's simply a matter of, I feel like I've done what I can do here. I can continue to stay and love you and be in relationship with you, but I've probably done what I can do in terms of your mission, and it just feels to me. I had somebody call me up about 2 weeks ago and said, can I talk to you? I'm thinking about doing my paperwork. And I was kind of surprised, and I said, really? And he said, yeah. He said, I'm really happy where I am, but I just have this sense. So that's one piece of it. The other thing is, as hard as this is for you, as beloved as Pastor Paul is, and as much good ministry as he's brought to you, a new pastor will bring maybe some different things. In the meantime, you all are going to learn to claim your own mission in this place and in this. So I get it. I guess I just want to say, don't really feel guilt. I mean, if you feel it, you feel it. That's the way to say, don't feel guilty. But I think it really is okay, and it really is how the Holy Spirit works. Different relationships happen. Yeah.
Can you explain a little more detail the interim
Yeah.
process, how we get our interim pastor, when that might be? That's
After this general meeting tonight, I'm going to meet with the council. I have a name for them that the bishop is recommending. For interims, we don't do a whole call process thing because, again, this is for a short period of time, and these are people whose gifts certainly are to be your pastor, but are also trained to do this. So this could happen. It will then be the council's responsibility to be in contact with this pastor, to work out with them compensation, all of that. It could be that that interim could be here within a week or two of your pastor leaving. And part of that will be just helping you through that sense of loss. Again, the interim pastors are trained not only to be your pastor through this, but also to lead you through the process of defining your mission. Now, I want to say this, and I'm going to say it as strongly as I can. The interim pastor is not a candidate to be your permanent pastor. Did you hear me? Your interim pastor is not a candidate. Now, I'm going to say to you, so my husband is an intentional interim. He's on interim 8 now, I think. And he will tell you within about, well, usually within the first month, people are saying, oh, can't you stay? You know, we really love you. Well, of course, because here's somebody who's brought stability and pastoral care in the midst of things. But the reason why it's so important that you know and that interim knows and that you remind each other, because sometimes interims come and fall in love too, is for the interim to do their work, they need to not have a dog in the hunt. What do I mean by that? Well, the interim comes not to set their agenda, not to tell you what they think you should do, but to help you figure that out. If I come in as your interim and I start thinking, oh, it's a pretty nice gig here. I kind of like Pleasantville. These people are really nice. I'm going to start shaping things that work for me. I'm going to try to kind of set things up, which means I might not say the hard thing that needs to be said. I mean, most interims are very compassionate people, but sometimes we all need to hear, okay, people, you gotta, straighten up. You gotta get going on this. So it isn't about what the interim thinks this congregation should do or be. It's about helping you figure that out. And if there is any inkling in the back of their head that, I'd kind of like to stay, it affects the whole process. So why I'm telling you that is that again, one of the ways that you'll support your interim pastor is to remember that the interim pastor is not a candidate to be your called pastor. And don't put that kind of pressure on them. Don't say, oh, pastor, couldn't you just stay? You know, we heard that, you know, Pastor Smith at so-and-so was able to do that. Drives you crazy, doesn't it? And so don't put them in that situation. Appreciate them for why they're here, and work together with them. And they will rejoice with you when you call that new pastor. They will feel like job well done, and they will wish the best for you. Yeah.
We're a very nice group of people, but has there ever been a situation where the interim clashes with the congregation? And then what do you do?
Yeah, so I do want to say that's why the council at the beginning will meet. Now, what I always say is you've got to have a really good reason if they say we don't. I mean, I had somebody once say to me, well, we didn't think they'd be very good with youth ministry. I was like, they're not here to do that.
Margie, what was the question?
The question was, what if there's a clash? So at the beginning, there is with the interim. At the beginning, there is a chance to have that conversation. And once in a while, it does happen. And then we work together to figure it out. Can this continue? Can it not? I mean, I'm sure there are times when that's had to be, when the interim has had to pull out. The interim may not be somebody that, I mean, you may like your interim and still think, well, I'm glad he or she is here, but this would not be somebody I would run, and that's just fine. But if there is a real, if there is a real clash, or if there is a sense of an interim coming in and kind of telling you all what you should do, then we need to have conversation. Absolutely. Because if it's not working, it's not going to be working, and it's not going to get you to where you need to be. Yeah.
If it doesn't work, the first interim pass them. Give you another one.
Of course.
If they just
Of course.
Yep. Hit it off.
Yeah. Yeah. I would ask that you remember, and I'm not saying that this would all be you. I mean, you could get, I feel really good about the person the bishop is recommending, and I think you all will like him too. But remember that you don't have to fall in love with the interim the same way you kind of do with the called pastor. Remember that they are here for a particular role. And again, this does not happen, I mean, since I've been in this synod, I haven't had that problem. I've worked in some other synods where they've had to deal with that. But we get to know interims pretty well, and again, it might be somebody local, it might be somebody from outside, but we will know who they are, we will, talk to their bishop. So we try to make that happen, and again, that's not a real, I wouldn't fret about that. If an issue comes up, we'll deal with it, but I would take that off your things to worry about list. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
How many people are on the call committee?
It's good. Check out your constitution. Some constitutions are very specific. Generally, 5, 6. You want enough that you have some various input, kind of cross-section of the congregation. But if you get many more than that, because you're not supposed to meet as a call committee unless everybody can be there. So trying to get more people than that together on a regular basis, trying to reach some kind of shared discernment. So I don't know, does your Constitution give instructions? Anybody here know?
Minimum of 6.
6?
Maximum of 9.
Yeah. I would lean more towards the 6. The other question people want to know is what about, should it be council members? Generally, no. There may be a council person on, and again, sometimes some constitutions say one way or the other.
It's a liaison.
But it's a hard, and we use that term liaison, but it really isn't, because that council person can't share anything with the council. So it's not like, but it's fine, I think that's part of the cross-section. But remember that the council and the call committee have different roles. Oh. Yeah.
Fix that poor committee.
Again, you all will figure that out. Again, I don't know what's in your constitution. Some constitutions are like, they will be elected, they will be appointed by the Synod Council. Generally, there's some kind of a process with the aim of having a variety of ages, old members, new members, all of those kinds of things, so that there is kind of a cross-section. But you all remember, will all have a say in developing that profile, which is their job is to live that out. Yeah.
The slate that we will be getting, will that be people who Synod believes are possible for us, as well as people who are interested in coming?
So here's what happens. My job is to come to the call committee, and I will say I will always come and sit with the call committee when I bring names, so that, and we'll have some conversation about, well, I'm bringing you this name because. So we'll have that conversation. When I have the profile, then I start paying attention, looking. When we get paperwork, so we get paperwork from the ELCA, it comes through their system, and I'll get a note that says, so-and-so has listed your synod as a synod of preference. I always invite, everybody who does that gets an invitation to have conversation. I'd say maybe half of them take me up on that. If they don't, then that's as far as it goes. And I have kind of a structured interview a bit, where it's questions that I talk about style of worship, we talk about, give me an example of when you've handled conflict, lots of questions like that. So I kind of have a sense of who they are, again, beyond just their paperwork. So I will make, sometimes people will contact me because my name is, this is who you contact if you're interested. I'm glad for that. I may or may not include their name in the slate, so I'm not going to bring a name just because somebody says, oh, I'd really like to be considered there. Sometimes it's just great. It's like, well, thank you, Holy Spirit, because, I wouldn't have thought about this, but you're right, this would be a good match. But other times, I just feel like I've got better choices. The same thing goes within your congregation. If somebody has a suggestion, that's fine. It needs to come to me so that I can vet, make sure they're in good standing. And again, that doesn't mean that that person will necessarily be brought as a candidate. I'm looking for what appears to be the best matches. Some of that is looking at what they've listed as gifts and what you all have said are important to you as gifts. That's a piece of it. Some of that comes just from, as you read paperwork, there are just things that they write that you say, boy, this really sounds like a fit. Same thing with conversations. the thing that we don't like to talk about, but it's becoming more and more important. I'll never bring you a candidate that you can't afford, because that's heartbreaking, you know, and it happens. You fall in love with a candidate, they fall in love with you, and then when it comes down to working out compensation, you can't agree. So it'll be important for me to really have a picture of what you all can do, and not bring you people that don't fit that. So that's a long answer to your question. But everybody kind of comes through the same, I mean, we make sure that if they're not from this synod, that their synod kind of supports them, says all this. And then I'm looking for those candidates that I think are the best fits.
A bit more specific to that, though, will the bishop or yourself know of candidates who have not put the paperwork in, but you think that it's time for them to make a change?
Sometimes.
And we'll
Yeah.
then put them on our schedule?
Sometimes, yeah.
Okay.
Because sometimes you just know somebody and you think, I think they could
be a good fit,
I
yeah.
think they could be a good fit there. Yeah.
How far away do you reach out for candidates?
Anywhere in the ELCA. I mean,
We
if
could get somebody from California?
you could. You could. We have a congregation in the synod that just called a pastor from California. It's one of the, I mean, all of these things are factors in terms of what might fit. Again, you don't have to remember all of this now. We'll continue to walk with you as we cut to each stage. We'll be working with the council and then on with the call committee to say, okay, this is what we're doing now. But the main thing is, I just really want you to know and believe that you are not on your own. One of my big things is that we are church together, and you're not just Emanuel, you're church when you're here, and got lots of other folks that are connected to you in that way. So, yeah.
Next steps?
Next steps are, we'll talk about getting your interim. Because the interim then will be the one to kind of start walking you through all of the other pieces that need to happen. And I say that, I just said that, but have you talked to Pastor O'Hanlon?
No.
Yet? So Pastor O'Hanlon will he will do an exit interview with Pastor Paul and with the council. So that'll be the next steps, and making sure that there are some documents that one of them is just kind of everybody agrees that the parish records are in good shape, that nobody owes anybody else money. But the other piece, let me tell you about this because this is hard sometimes for people. Pastor Paul and council officers will sign a covenant that says Pastor Paul is no longer your pastor. So he is not available to come back and do a baptism or do a wedding or any of those pastoral acts. Doesn't have anything to do with how much he loves you, how much you love him, but he is no longer your pastor, and he cannot be involved in any way in the life of this congregation. So two things will happen. There will be the covenant that's signed, and you will all be receiving a letter that will explain that to everyone in the congregation and why it's important. So there are people who aren't here tonight who will also get that letter. Everybody gets the letter to explain that. That's really hard to think about, especially when a pastor's been around for a long time and has been there for so many of your family moments. But he will not be your pastor anymore, and you need to, you need to support him in that. He of course understands how hard that is for you, but so really encourage one another not to ask, because that's really hard.
I didn't hear everything that you
Yeah.
said, but is he still considered a member of the church?
No, he'll
Not at all.
join another congregation.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And that'll be his decision where he joins. So, yeah.
You could join here though, if you chose to,
No,
right?
no. He cannot be connected to this congregation. You can't, and part of that just is, you can't go from being the pastor to just being another member. That gets really, not that he or any of us on Synod staff are very often in the churches where we're members. I went to my church on the Sunday before Memorial Day, and I said, I'll see you at the end of August, just because that's the nature of a bishop's work and those of us who work with him. But he will need to find
In
another
other
congregation.
words, with special permission, he still would not be able to come here
Right.
for a funeral, for a wedding.
No, he is not your pastor anymore. Now, sometimes there are anniversary kinds of things. Certainly invite him back for that. Invite all of your former pastors back for that. But those personal pastoral acts, and I will tell you, I know it kind of seems kind of harsh, but I'm working with a congregation right now that frankly, I don't know if they're going to make it because of the pastor staying very connected with a few people in the congregation, and that has just caused all sorts of turmoil and conflict.
So how long from now to the end, how many months or years will it take?
Very often, unless something happens, very often a year or so. Even after the call process is finished, there's still a month or two before your new pastor is actually here. But if things move along, again, you all are a healthy congregation, so I don't anticipate, sometimes there's just so much work to be done before they can really even start thinking about calling another pastor. But my best guess would be within a year. Maybe less, but. Okay. Well, I will be here for other things. I look forward to walking this with you all, and absolutely pray that the Holy Spirit works in all of us, and I really believe that that new pastor is out there, that God is preparing that person, even though you and that person don't know it yet, but I absolutely believe in that. I would just like to close this part out before I meet with the council. There is a prayer that is from evening prayer, and the ELW comes actually from Holden evening prayer, but that I have kind of claimed as my mobility prayer as you step out in faith on this new adventure. So the Lord be with you.
Also with you.
God, you have called your servants to ventures of which we cannot see the ending, by paths as yet untrodden, through perils unknown. Give us faith to go out in good courage, not knowing where we go, but only that your hand is leading us and your love supporting us. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.